Hello. Today let's look at Leetcode 73, set matrix to 0. Um, Basically, you've been given a matrix and you've been asked to set, if you find a 0 in there, set all of its column on that cell to 0 and all of the rows on that cell to 0. Um, there are two ways to solve it. You can loop through the matrix and record all cells coordinates with 0. After that, you loop through the cells with you loop through the set and set those coordinates, column to zeros, and then it rows to 0 as well. But you can also solve it with this approach that I'm about to describe here with this example, right? So you have this, you have that, and you have that. So you have 0 here, you have 1, everything else is 1, right? But first we check if there is any zeros here in the first cell, in the cell, in the row. If there are any zeros on row 0, right? In the cells in row 0. And then we record it as true or false. True or false. The same for the first column as well. If there are any zeros, we record that. And then we deal with the rest of the stuff going on in here, right? So all of this part, all of this part here, we ignore for now and just deal with the portion here, right? So after that, we are going to be dealing with this portion. This portion here, we look through it, right? If we find a 0, we set the column of that cell, right? The 0 column of that cell to 0. So we do something like that. And we also set the 0 column of that row for that coordinate to 0, right? So now we have that. Now we continue looping the rest, right? If we come in here, we check if the 0 column, right, or the 0 column of that coordinate is 0. If it's 0, we set it to 0. Or if the 0 row of that coordinate is 0, we set it to 0. In this case, it's this column here, right? So we set it to 0. Then we come down here. In this case, it is this 0 up above here, so we set it to 0. So then we end up with all of this, right? We end up with this 0 and this 0, right? So that is how we are going to solve it. And the question says we should solve it in place. So this is a nice way of solving it in place. So let's look at how we can write the logic for that. So let's get the length of the rows, which is length of matrix. And then the columns is equal to length of matrix 0. Now we check the first row to see if it's true or false. So any, that is going to go to any. Now if any one at all is 0, right? If any one at all up here is 0, we record true, else false. So if any matrix at the rows 0, the column is still going to be columns. If that is equal to 0 for column in range of the columns, then it's going to be true. So we are going to do the same thing for first calls. Same thing, any, boom, matrix row at column 0 is equal to 0 for row in range of rows. Yes, so this is the first portion, right? The next part that I described above, we are going to deal with all this portion, right? So for row in range 1 rows, and for columns in range 1 calls, if the matrix at 0 at row and column is equal to 0, then we set matrix at column, that same cell at column 0, that same cell at row 0, but the same column to 0, and that same cell at row 0, oh, at column 0 to 0. Okay, now we are going to look through the rest of it. We're still going to continue that's dealing with situations like this, where if this is 0 and that part is 0, we set it to 0 too. So the same thing for row in range 1 to rows, and for call in range 1 to calls, if matrix at 0 row and the same call is equal to 0, or that same matrix at same row but at column 0 is equal to 0, then we set the matrix to 0 too. So that cell 0 call is now equal to 0. Right, so we have dealt with that. Now that we are done with that, we come back here. If this is true, we set everything to true. If this is false, we set everything to false, right? So if first row, then for column in range calls, we set that matrix on that row 0, every column to 0. Similarly, if first column is true, then for rows, right, if this is 0, then every column on this row should be set to 0. If this column has 1 0 in it, then every row on this column should be set to 0. Basically, that's what we are doing, right? For each row in the range of rows, the matrix at that row but at column 0 is set to 0. Then we return the matrix. All right, so this is how you solve set metrics to 0 in place. Let's see if I missed anything. All right, well, that is it. This is a thing and O of m plus n time complexity, but O of 1 space complexity. We practically do not use any space here. So thanks for watching. See you in the next one.